Earlier, I spoke to international extradition's lawyer, Douglas McNabb. He gave us some legal insight into this case and shared why he found it somewhat shocking that Assange can be extradited to Sweden.
The European countries have a law that provides for an expedited extradition among all of the EU countries. And Sweden has a law that says that if Sweden wants to talk to a particular individual and that individual doesn't want to talk to them, then Sweden has the right to seek their arrest.
Just for not talking to them?
Just for not talking to them at all. We must remember that Mr. Assange has not been charged with a crime in Sweden. Sweden wants to talk to him. And so, as a result of that, Sweden has sought his arrest. Further, Sweden went to Interpol and asked Interpol out of Lyon, France, to issue a red notice. And a red notice is like a fugitive arrest warrant. It's a notice, an all-points bulletin to all 188 member countries of Interpol. If you find Mr. Assange anywhere, arrest him. We're going to place him in extradition proceedings. All of this because Sweden wanted to talk to Mr. Assange, not because they have filed criminal charges against him.
Wow, pretty incredible. Let's talk about some of the scenarios that could happen in the coming days. I know that, you know, if just as is, that he would be sent away in 10 days. But from what I understand, the appeals process is going to happen. Assange's lawyers say they will appeal this. But there is also some talk that the U.S. can request Assange's extradition to this country. Talk about that.
Well, apparently under UK law, if Mr. Assange does appeal his case, which I'm told that he's going to be doing that during the pendency of the appeal, if the U.S. were to indict Mr. Assange for a federal crime and therefore seek to have Mr. Assange extradited from the UK to the United States, with those two competing requests, Sweden, case on appeal, and the new extradition request, it would be up to the Home Secretary to decide whether Mr. Assange would be extradited to the United States or whether the appeal process would stand.
And there are people who speculate that Home Secretary would allow, in fact, for Assange to be extradited to the United States. Have you heard anything?
I have. I have read that there are legal experts in Britain that have said that they believe that the Home Secretary would favor the U.S. over Sweden.
And I know Assange's lawyers have said in the past that if Assange does come to the United States, eventually he could be sent to Guantanamo Bay. Some even say he could face the death penalty. The bottom line here, many are questioning whether an extradition to Sweden, where he could face sexual assault charges, would be worse or not than being extradited to the United States. Talk about that difference.
Well, whether if Mr. Assange were ultimately extradited to the United States, do I see Mr. Assange being lodged at Gitmo? No, I don't think that is a credible argument for the defense team to be making. And while I think that the defense team did a very good job in making not a whole lot to be able to argue on from a defense perspective, I think that the argument that Mr. Assange potentially could be lodged at Gitmo is a poor argument, and I think perhaps it might have hurt their other arguments and the credibility of their other arguments. In terms of facing the death penalty or potentially facing that, it really would depend upon what crime Mr. Assange were charged with. We have 4,300 federal crimes in the United States. If the United States government wants to find a crime to charge Mr. Assange with,
which they have not yet, we should remind people.
As far as we know, they have not done that. It's possible that they could have, and it's sealed, and it's not made a matter of public record yet. But I think that because they'd have to follow the extradition process, the courts in Britain would certainly receive that information and would proceed accordingly. But if Mr. Assange were charged with espionage, for example, and we're just talking hypothetically, that potentially is a death-eligible statute. And so he could be charged with espionage, he could face up to life, And in the federal system, life is life. They carry out in a box. We do not have any early release or parole in the federal system, so they could charge him and just pursue life charges, or they could also make it death eligible if they were to do that. From a practical standpoint, do I see this as a death eligible case? No, I don't.
All right, international extraditions attorney Douglas McNabb, thanks so much for weighing in.
Thank you.